First, this morning, backlash is growing against McKenzie Phillips. Her shocking story of rape and incest at the hands of her father, 60s icon John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, has sparked a Phillips family feud.
I woke up that night from a blackout to find myself having sex with my own father.
In the swinging 1960s, the Mamas and the Papas captured the sound of a generation. Their harmonies were pure California sunshine. California Dreamin', Monday, Monday, and a dozen other songs that became the soundtrack of the era. And at the center of it all was John Phillips, the group's brilliant but deeply troubled leader. He was a musical genius, a songwriter who helped shape the sound of the 60s, but behind the fame was a life filled with chaos, addiction, and pain. And for his children, born into that world of celebrity, drugs, and broken dreams, life was anything but simple. They carried his name, his talent, and sometimes his demons. Some found their own fame, others turned away from the spotlight entirely. From pop superstardom and Hollywood scandals to private lives far from the stage. This is the story of what became of John Phillips's children. The music was timeless, but the family story is something the world never truly heard. John Edmund Andrew Phillips was born on August 30th, 1935, in Parris Island, South Carolina. His father, Claude, was a career Marine, and his mother, Edna, was a strict Southern homemaker. The family moved constantly due to his father's military career, from South Carolina to Virginia to Washington, D.C. John later said those early years taught him how to adapt. When you're always the new kid, you learn to perform, to be someone people notice. Music became his escape. As a teenager, he fell in love with the harmonies of early R&B and doo-wop, and he spent hours teaching himself guitar and piano. At first, his father disapproved of his musical ambitions, hoping John would follow him into the military. But John's creative spirit couldn't be contained. He often joked, "I joined a band instead of the Marines. That was my rebellion." In the late 1950s, he attended the United States Naval Academy but dropped out before graduating, a decision that marked the beginning of his pursuit of a life in music. He formed his first group, the Smoothies, and then the Journeymen, performing in the folk clubs of New York's Greenwich Village. It was there he began to develop the songwriting voice that would soon reshape popular music. By the early 1960s, he met Michelle Gilliam, a young model and singer. Together, they would join forces with Denny Doherty and Cass Elliot to create the Mamas and the Papas. Their first big hit, California Dreamin', released in 1965, was inspired by a cold New York winter and John's longing for warmth and escape. The song became an anthem of its time, wistful, melodic, and timeless. John later reflected, "I was dreaming of sunshine, of freedom. Maybe I was always dreaming of something just out of reach." We've hit 10,000 subscribers, and it's all thanks to you. But this is just the beginning. If you want more deep dives, insights, and discoveries, hit that subscribe button. Let's reach those 15,000 subscribers together. Your support means a lot. Underneath the success, though, the seeds of turmoil were already there. Fame brought money, power, and access, but also excess. John was brilliant and controlling, charismatic, yet self-destructive. Michelle would later describe him as a man who could make magic and madness in the same breath. Through it all, one truth became clear. John Phillips wasn't just a musician, he was a mirror of the decade he helped define. His songs captured the beauty and the darkness of the 1960s, and his family would come to bear the weight of both. His 5 children, Mackenzie, Jeffrey, Chynna, Tamar, and Bijou, would each inherit pieces of that legacy, and each would grapple with what it meant to be the child of a man whose life was both a dream and a cautionary tale. As John himself once said, "You can't separate the song from the singer, and you can't separate the music from the life that made it. Mackenzie Phillips was born in 1959, the daughter of John Phillips and his first wife, Susan Adams. From the start, her life was steeped in music, fame, and turbulence. Her father was already living the unpredictable life of a touring musician, a world filled with brilliance, excess, and chaos. By the age of 12, Mackenzie had already stepped into the spotlight. She landed a role in George Lucas's American Graffiti, 1973, playing Carol Morrison, the sharp-tongued preteen riding shotgun in a hot rod through one wild California night. The film became a cultural milestone, and Mackenzie, barely a teenager, was suddenly famous. Just 2 years later, she was cast in the hit CBS sitcom One Day at a Time as Julie Cooper, the rebellious daughter in a single-parent household. The role made her a household name, but also exposed her to the darker side of Hollywood fame. Surrounded by adults, pressure, and easy access to drugs, Mackenzie began using substances in her early teens. Her addiction deepened through the late 1970s and 1980s, mirroring the same patterns of excess that consumed her father. By her own admission, my life became a carousel of chaos, addiction, fame, rehab, relapse, and recovery. But the most shocking revelation came decades later. In her 2009 memoir, High on Arrival, Mackenzie revealed years of substance abuse and trauma, including the deeply disturbing allegation of an incestuous relationship with her father, John Phillips. The confession sent shockwaves across the world. Some found it hard to believe, others praised her for her bravery. Mackenzie later explained, "I didn't tell my story to destroy anyone. I told it to save myself and to help others who've lived through darkness like mine." After years of struggle, Mackenzie rebuilt her life. She became sober and dedicated herself to recovery work, turning her pain into purpose. Today, she serves as an addiction counselor at the Breathe Life Healing Center in Los Angeles, helping others find their way out of addiction. Mackenzie also returned to acting, reminding audiences of her talent and resilience. She appeared in the hit Netflix series Orange is the New Black, playing Barb Denning, a tough inmate with a haunted past. Her performance was widely praised as raw and powerful, a mirror of her real-life journey from pain to strength. In recent years, she's also appeared in shows like One Day at a Time, the 2017 reboot, bridging her past and present careers. Beyond acting, she's a public speaker and advocate for trauma recovery, mental health, and addiction awareness. Mackenzie is the proud mother of one son, Shane Barakan, a musician who shares her creative DNA but has lived a much quieter life away from the spotlight. Today, Mackenzie Phillips is not defined by her trauma or her father's fame, but by her survival. Her journey from a Hollywood child star to an outspoken advocate and healer reflects both the tragedy and triumph of growing up in the shadow of rock and roll. As she once said, "Recovery isn't about forgetting where you came from. It's about learning to walk through it and still keep your head high." Chynna Phillips was born in 1968 in Los Angeles, the daughter of John Phillips and Michelle Phillips, the golden couple of the Mamas and the Papas. She was born right in the middle of her parents' fame, when songs like California Dreamin and Monday were topping the charts, and their lives were a blur of recording sessions, TV appearances, and celebrity parties. But even as a child, Chynna could sense that life at home wasn't as harmonious as the music. John and Michelle's marriage was crumbling under infidelity, jealousy, and substance abuse. Michelle later admitted, "We were too young, too wild, and too famous, too fast." When the band broke apart, so did the family. Chynna grew up surrounded by music, but also by instability. She once said, "I saw what fame did to my parents, the good and the terrible. I wanted to make my own mark, but I wanted to do it my way." In the late 1980s, Chynna found her own voice, literally. Along with Carney and Wendy Wilson, the daughters of Beach Boys legend Brian Wilson, she formed Wilson Phillips. Their debut self-titled album in 1990 exploded in popularity, producing massive hits like Hold On, Release Me, and You're in Love. The group sold over 10 million albums, earned Grammy nominations, and became one of the defining pop acts of the early 90s. For a moment, Chynna Phillips was at the center of pop culture, living the fame her parents once knew. But behind the glossy success, Chynna battled her own struggles with anxiety, depression, and identity. In interviews, she has been open about how hard it was to reconcile her Christian faith with the chaos of Hollywood. She once said, "I had everything, the success, the fame, and still felt empty. My faith was what finally filled that space." In 1995, she married actor Billy Baldwin, part of the famous Baldwin acting family. The couple has 3 children, Jameson, Vance, and Brooke Baldwin. Their marriage has weathered the ups and downs of fame, and Chynna often credits her spirituality for helping her stay grounded. After a temporary breakup of Wilson Phillips, Chynna pursued a solo career and released her debut solo album, Naked and Sacred, in 1995. Though it didn't match her group's success, it showcased her talent as a songwriter and storyteller. She reunited with Wilson Phillips in the 2000s, releasing new albums and touring internationally. More recently, Chynna has found a new platform for connection through her YouTube channel, California Preachin', where she shares her faith, her struggles, and her reflections on fame and family. With humor and honesty, she talks about her marriage, her past, and her spiritual journey, turning her channel into an unexpected safe space for others seeking inspiration. Despite being the daughter of rock legends, Chynna Phillips carved out her own path, one rooted not in rebellion, but in redemption. Her life reflects a balance her father never found: love, faith, and stability amid the echoes of rock and roll. As she once put it, "I grew up in the ruins of my parents' fame, but I learned that the only foundation that lasts is faith." Among all of John Phillips's children, Jeffrey Phillips remains the most private, the quiet observer in a family known for loud music, bright lights, and deep chaos. Born to John Phillips and his first wife, Susan Adams, Jeffrey spent his early years moving between his mother's calm, grounded world and his father's whirlwind of fame. Unlike his sister Mackenzie, who was thrust into the spotlight as a teenager, Jeffrey mostly stayed in the background. But that didn't mean he wasn't part of the story. He grew up around the mamas and the papas, literally in the studio, watching the magic happen. As he recalled in a conversation with his sister Chynna, "I grew up in the recording studio. I was 9 or 10 when I'd go with Dad. I remember Bones Howe at the board and the 4 of them warming up at Cass's house. They sounded beautiful." Jeffrey remembers Cass Elliot fondly, describing her as like my big aunt who always gave me a hug and a kiss. He said she had a presence that went out 20 feet ahead of her, calling her a force of nature, pure warmth and charisma. His stories about her reveal how deeply connected he was to the family's musical circle, even as a child. There were wild moments, too. He recalled living at the Chateau Marmont after the band's success, where he amused himself by shooting BB guns out the window at the Marlboro Man billboard until the FBI knocked on the door. He laughed about it years later, remembering how his father defended him to the agents and only slapped him once after Jeffrey accidentally slammed a car door into Michelle's leg. "It was a mistake," he said. "I think he just reacted. He wasn't a monster, just human." What stands out most about Jeffrey's memories is how tenderly he speaks of his father, despite the turbulence. He remembers John taking him on long beach walks in Malibu, eating croissants and bologna sandwiches, writing songs together on his lap, and even pretending to pose for album covers in the mirror. He'd sit me on his lap, we'd write songs, then pose in front of the mirror and ask, what would our record cover look like? When John died in 2001, Jeffrey's reaction was quiet, but full of love. "It was kind of blank," he said softly. "I loved him very much, but I already firmly believed in the next world. All I felt for him was love." After his father's passing, a nurse offered him a lock of John's hair, which he still keeps as a memento. I thanked him for the beach walks, for writing songs with me. He visits me every day. I'll hear one of his songs come on the radio, and I'll go, "Yep, it's you." Even though Jeffrey largely avoided public life, his deep sense of spirituality and peace comes through in every word. He speaks with reverence for the music, warmth for his siblings, and a quiet understanding of the complex man his father was. He even reflected proudly on John's legacy, quoting producer Andrew Loog Oldham. John Phillips's songwriting was the first real answer to the British invasion. He took the mantle of pop away from Europe and put it on America's shoulders. Jeffrey's life has been one of reflection rather than performance. He often jokes that he's the one kid in the family who isn't famous, but in truth, he represents something the Phillips family rarely found: peace. As his sister Mackenzie once said, "Some of us had to live out loud to survive." Jeff always chose to live quietly, and maybe that was the smartest choice of all. While names like Mackenzie, Chynna, and Bijou became familiar in headlines and on screens, Tamar Phillips has remained a quiet mystery in the sprawling Phillips family tree. The daughter of John Phillips and Elizabeth Jones, Tamar was born in the late 1970s, after the peak of the Mamas and the Papas fame, when John's life was already unraveling into excess and instability. Unlike many of her half-siblings, Tamar grew up largely outside the world of celebrity. There are very few public records about her, and she has never sought the spotlight, choosing privacy over the fame that shaped and scarred so many of her family members. Even People magazine, in its 2024 feature on the Phillips family, described Tamar as someone who has stayed almost entirely out of the public eye. For years, fans of the Mamas and the Papas didn't even know she existed. Tamar reportedly maintained a complicated but affectionate connection to her father. While she wasn't part of the chaotic early years of his fame, she inherited both his musical ear and his introspective side. Family sources have described her as creative, sensitive, and spiritual, much like her half-brother Jeffrey. Those who have met her say Tamar carries herself with quiet grace and prefers to focus on her private life. She is believed to live in the United States and, like several of her siblings, values her independence deeply. In contrast to her father's turbulent life and her siblings' public struggles, Tamar represents a kind of calm in the storm, the quieter branch of a famously loud family tree. Her decision to step back from fame may have been a form of self-preservation, a conscious choice to live without the scrutiny that defined her last name. Though she rarely speaks publicly, Tamar's existence is a reminder that not every legacy born from rock and roll is measured in fame or headlines. Some are measured in silence, peace, and the choice to live a life unseen. As one of John Phillips's lesser-known children, Tamar stands as the quiet echo of a man whose voice once filled the world. Proof that sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't the one everyone hears. Bijou Lily Phillips was born in 1980 in Greenwich, Connecticut, the daughter of John Phillips and Genevieve Waite, a South African actress, model, and singer. She was born into a world of fame, beauty, and privilege. but also into the turbulence and brokenness that had long defined the Phillips family. Her father, the once golden voice behind the Mamas and the Papas, was struggling with addiction and scandal by the time Bijou arrived. Her mother, the ethereal bohemian muse of the 1960s, was a creative spirit, but not always a steady presence. From a very young age, Bijou was surrounded by the glamour and recklessness of the entertainment world. Her parents divorced when she was only a toddler, and she spent much of her early life shuttling between homes in New York and California. When her father lost custody of her, she was placed in foster care for a time before later moving in with him in Los Angeles. Life with John Phillips was as eccentric as it was unstable. Their home was filled with music and laughter, but also long nights, parties, and the unpredictable rhythm of a rock and roll legend in decline. By the age of 13, Bijou had begun modeling professionally. Her beauty and striking resemblance to her mother made her an instant sensation in the fashion world. Within a year, she appeared in major campaigns for Calvin Klein and in magazines such as Vogue, Vanity Fair, and Interview. She became one of the youngest models ever to appear on the cover of Italian Vogue. But behind the glamorous photo shoots, she was living a life few adults could handle. Emancipated at 14, Bijou moved into her own apartment in New York City and became a fixture of the 1990s downtown scene, a world of art, music, and excess. She was often seen at the trendiest clubs with other celebrity offspring, including Liv Tyler, Paris Hilton, and the fashion elite. The press labeled her one of the it girls of the era, fascinated by her rebellious beauty and wild nightlife. But as Bijou would later admit, the freedom that came with fame also fueled her self-destruction. In interviews, she reflected on those years with raw honesty. "I was a kid trying to survive in a world where adults lost control. I was angry, lost, and had no idea who I really was." Drugs and alcohol became a part of her daily life, echoing the same demons that had haunted her father and sister Mackenzie. By the late 1990s, Bijou began channeling her energy into music and acting. In 1999, she released her debut album, I'd Rather Eat Glass, a bold, provocative collection of pop-rock songs inspired by her turbulent adolescence. The title, she explained, reflected her feelings about the fashion industry and fame. "I'd literally rather eat glass than go back to that world." That same year, she made her film debut in Black and White, a gritty drama directed by James Toback. The role launched her acting career, leading to standout performances in films such as Almost Famous, Bully, and Havoc. Critics praised her emotional depth, often noting that her performances felt lived in, a reflection of the real struggles she carried. Her acting career flourished through the 2000s, with roles in both independent and mainstream films. Directors were drawn to her authenticity, the mix of vulnerability and fire that made her impossible to ignore. But even as her career grew, her personal life remained turbulent. In 2011, Bijou married actor Danny Masterson after several years of dating. They shared a deep connection and welcomed their daughter, Fiona Frances Masterson, in 2014. For a time, it seemed as if Bijou had found peace, balancing motherhood with a quieter, more private life away from the Hollywood spotlight. She focused on her family, her health, and her sobriety. However, her world was shaken again when Masterson was charged and later convicted in 2023 on serious criminal charges. Bijou stood by him publicly during the trial, but after his conviction, she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The news brought Bijou back into the public eye, a place she had spent years trying to escape. Those close to her say that despite everything, Bijou has shown remarkable strength. She has focused on raising her daughter and rebuilding her life, choosing privacy and peace over publicity. She no longer lives the wild life of her teenage years, and her priorities have shifted toward healing, family, and stability. In recent interviews, she has spoken about forgiveness of herself, of her parents, and of her past. "You can't rewrite where you came from," she said, "but you can choose who you become after the wreckage." Bijou Phillips's story is one of extremes: fame and fall, chaos and recovery, heartbreak and hope. She embodies both the brilliance and the darkness of the Phillips legacy, the way art and pain are often intertwined. But unlike her father, she found the strength to change her story before it consumed her. Today, Bijou lives a quieter life in California, raising her daughter and keeping a small circle of family and friends. She no longer seeks the spotlight, and perhaps for the first time in her life, she doesn't need it. Her journey stands as one of survival, a testament to resilience born from a lifetime of turmoil. In the end, she is the Phillips child who faced the storm and walked through it, carrying forward not the chaos of her father's world, but its music, its fire, and its hard-won grace. When John Edmund Andrew Phillips died on March 18, 2001, in Los Angeles, California, it marked the end of one of rock music's most complicated and captivating lives. He was 75 years old and had endured decades of excess, creative brilliance, and personal turmoil. His cause of death was heart failure, the result of years of drug and alcohol abuse that had taken their toll on his body. John's final years were quieter, though not without controversy. After years of addiction and legal battles, he had attempted to rebuild his life through music. He worked on solo projects, collaborated with his daughter Mackenzie, and occasionally performed with reformed versions of the Mamas and the Papas. But his health was fragile, and his reputation, both as a musical genius and as a deeply troubled man, followed him to the end. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, a place where many of his musical peers are buried. The funeral was a small, emotional gathering attended by family, friends, and those who had stood by him through his highs and lows. His daughter Chynna later recalled, "We sang at his funeral. We had to. Music was how he spoke to the world and how we spoke to him." As with many great artists, John's death reopened difficult questions about his legacy. On one hand, he was the brilliant composer behind timeless songs like California Dreamin', Monday, Monday, and San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair. Music that defined a generation and still echoes today. On the other, he left behind a family scarred by addiction, betrayal, and public scandal. His estate, though modest compared to his fame, became the subject of inheritance disputes and division among his children. While some royalties continued to flow from the Mamas and the Papas catalog, John's fortune had long been eroded by legal costs, taxes, and years of excess. What he left behind was less financial and more emotional, a legacy of art, pain, and resilience that his children would carry in different ways. Mackenzie found redemption in recovery, turning her trauma into advocacy for addiction awareness. Chynna turned to faith and music, choosing healing over fame. Bijou faced her own battles, but devoted herself to motherhood and stability. Jeffrey and Tamar, the quiet ones, chose peace and privacy. Together, they represent every side of their father, the creative spirit, the survivor, and the seeker. In one of his final interviews, John said something that now feels prophetic. "I've made more mistakes than most men could live through. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that music, real music, comes from the places that hurt." That line captures the essence of John Phillips, a man who turned his flaws into melodies and his regrets into art. His children inherited both his talent and his demons, but most importantly, they inherited his fight to transform pain into meaning. Today, over half a century after California Dreamin' first played on the radio, John Phillips' music remains a symbol of an era, the harmony and heartbreak of the 1960s. His children, each in their own way, continue to live out the echoes of that dream, surviving, healing, and finding peace beyond the shadow of their father's fame. As Chynna once said in reflection of her family's journey, "My dad's songs were about longing, for warmth, for love, for something that lasts." Maybe all of us, his children, are still looking for that too. But I think he'd be proud that we're still singing. If you enjoyed this deep look into the legacy behind the mamas and the papas and the untold stories of John Phillips' children, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about the real lives behind the legends. Let us know in the comments, which of John Phillips' children's stories surprised you the most? And what do you think the true legacy of the mamas and the papas really is? Thanks for watching, and remember, even when the music stops, the dream always lives on.